Your shoulders can get tight a lot when you've been focusing on training your shoulders, because this focus on a specific muscle group, rather than the focus on the whole helix which travels to the fingertips and to the core like a twisted, multiple-stranded piece of rope, ends up blocking the energy in the shoulders. And the shoulders take over to prevent you from transmitting and listening through the limbs. So some of the ways that I like to soften this up are empty arms sequences like this, or like this, allowing the arms to really be ropes, feeling the way the blood and the soft tissue, the red tissue, syncs with the pendular action all the way towards the fingertips and even out the fingertips when you apply a little bit of intent to lengthen. This intent to lengthen, which helps us to lean into the white tissue or elastic or the fascia of the arms, is not the same thing as extending really powerfully and flexing the top of the hands. It's much more of just a lengthening. It's a direct line. Like if you're standing up straight, lengthening tall isn't the same thing as lifting the chest and tucking the chin. So we want the lengthening version to access the white tissue. This allows us to create a sense of the arms being stretched. We're being decompressed from our central axis, or we're being lengthened if we're working with arm swings. Another variation to help you feel this concept is like this. So hand over shoulder, other hand over elbow, and then switch. And as you do this, you're keeping the shoulder girdle empty but full. What do I mean by empty but full? I'm not contracting the shoulder to create this swing. I'm actually just lengthening through the elbow and using the elbow as the pendulum. So empty in that sense, but full in the sense that there's a lot of space around the shoulder. I'm not letting it bunch up. As I swing in like this, my shoulder's not closing. I keep this regal, tall, long posture, and when I do it that way, I can really feel the white tissues through the chest down to the inside of the elbow to the fingertips being stretched. So if we apply this now to an overhead position, what we're looking to do is reach the hands overhead and project the intent upwards without thinking about particular muscle groups shortening. Now, because muscles can only pull, if we think about this from a muscular perspective, we're going to end up shortening. So what we want to do is actually lift the arm overhead with minimal muscular effort and maximal intent to lengthen and stretch that suit or web of fascia, the white tissue. So as you reach up, avoid anything like this, anything like this. Don't even cue a wrap. Literally just reach. Feel the sense of length and space up your spine, floating the bones in continuation through to the fingertips. Allow your fingertips to be drawn up to the sky, and if you find yourself bunching anywhere too much, start to wriggle the fingers. Moving the fingers, working through the wrists helps direct the intent upward, helps to build the sensation of the mind being in the hands instead of looking at the hands. And from here, as we continue to trace the hands up, lifting the hands up high, you might feel your shoulders working, but to whatever degree is possible, soften through those shoulders. And continue to let them travel up as you continue to fill the breath into the spine and to the ribs to allow space for the bones to float. If you're doing this with one hand at a time, allow the neck to be a neck, allow the arm to be an arm. Try not to bunch them, but also don't set your shoulders down because we do want this floating up of the bones. And as you start to get a feel for this, you can walk around. The objective of walking around is that because walking is so familiar, you're going to notice very quickly if you're walking in an odd position. You're going to feel the tensions traveling through your body, affecting and being affected by this reach. So walk as normally as possible, as relaxed as possible, but keep that intent upward. You can even explore some lunging positions. You can work with small amounts of tilting and side bending, but always keep the upward intent, like you're being stretched up. Now, when you couple this with something like a standing practice, where you're aligning your spine and floating the bones by drawing the rear crown up and sinking the muscles and the red tissues, relatively speaking. That enables you to feel that effortless floaty alignment when you start to invert. So what you can attempt to do is a downward dog. And you can bend your knees because we don't want to have any excess muscular effort or restriction here, and just feel through the hands. The attention should already be in the hands, so now when you really start to lengthen and reach, it should feel like a lighter reach, but also a more grounded and connected reach. Continue to reach without biasing any particular muscle group. Create length and stay in the hands. Keep the sensation in the hands. Now this same thing, you could begin to apply to an even more inverted position by doing a down dog on a wall. Or in this case, perhaps you could use a tree. And it starts to become like a handstand. This guy seems all good. So I'm going to start to stretch up tall, lengthening through my hands, and it's amazing how effortless this feels relative to a handstand when you haven't prepared the body in the same way. And then as you reach, feeling into the hands in the same way you would feel into your feet. So the weight is just behind the index finger knuckle. So in the same way that you'd put the weight just behind the ball of your foot here in a standing practice, so that you're sprung but also grounded. Sprung being the forward part of the weight, grounded being the heel part of the weight. We're right in the middle. You want to do the same thing with your feet because your feet are your hands. And from here I'm just reaching, staying in the hands, feeling my bones float skyward and allowing the effort in my tissues to sink down towards the ground. Breathing, relaxing and lengthening through the hands to the feet, softening, but feeling that sense of length and projection. And if you can start to really understand this, it becomes very freeing because your sense of center grows bigger and more forgiving. Your sense of being centrated and effortlessly aligned expands until balance becomes a greater area. Whereas when you haven't prepared yourself in this way, or when you're overly reliant on muscular tension, you end up having to lean into corners and joints and really tension particular tissues in order to feel balance. But really, you're not feeling balance as much when you do that. You're just locking yourself in place, resting into your elastic. So to feel balance, we need to be responsive and soft. So after a handstand like that, if you feel your shoulders are nice and toasty, go back to arm swings. Empty the energy through the ribs, funnel through the shoulder, no stopping at the shoulder. Feel the fingers, feel the hands, lengthen, swing. Exploring whatever variation feels enjoyable. Empty the shoulders, feel the hands. The body should be a transmitter, something that you can listen with, something that you can move with. And the better you're moving, the more you'll feel the things that you're touching and the alignment of gravity and the transmission of force through your kinetic chain without having to micromanage any one particular part of it. So, apply this concept of being in the hands through to your upper body exercises. I hesitate to even say shoulder exercises because I want you to get out of that paradigm. If you're pressing something overhead, I want you to be pressing it from the floor to the hands. And I want you to be feeling how when you align your midsection and you give yourself this sense of space, what you're pressing is felt through the whole body, not just bunching at the shoulders. So don't think in terms of shoulder exercises. That's an internal fighting, that frame. Think in terms of moving things and in terms of moving yourself. Let your body organize in the most efficient way. If you're working with shoulder rehabilitation, one of the big things that can happen is the sensitization of the shoulder prevents the input, the proprioception and the exteroception, sensing yourself and sensing your environment. It prevents that from happening because it bunches your awareness at the shoulder. Where the awareness is, the energy tends to also flow. We need to send the awareness via the intent back to the hands and restore function here. I mentioned earlier that the shoulders operate a little bit like a twisted rope. The rope has multiple strands in it, and if you loosen any of those strands or cut any of them, then the transmission through that connection is lost to a degree. So every finger, every line through the wrist is very important when you're gripping, when you're pressing. If you're crawling on the ground, it's important that everything connects and everything can articulate in the same way that's important that your whole foot and all of the toes function. Without that, the helix of tissues, which wraps through your limbs and controls the rotation, which all human movement is based off, is going to be lacking a little bit. So, to sum up, we have arm emptying, we have reaching, and reaching with the intent up here through the fingers. Floating the bones, not stacking the bones. Floating the bones, reaching, sinking the tissues, releasing the effort. We have walking around in this position, testing one arm then the other. We have a downward dog, or that style of inversion where you progressively get more upside down, ultimately using a chest to wall handstand or using a freestanding handstand. To bolster that shoulder practice, you have to have a midline and a spine which knows where it is. Sometimes the best way to learn that is simply through the standing practices, and I have another video on how to do a standing practice on YouTube. Then apply this concept of hand to foot connection. Be the conduit while you're training. Don't focus on muscle groups, focus on organizing the whole system while you're training, and this will help you build the kind of strength that comes from connection and that comes from attunement to your environment. That is all. Have a beautiful day.